Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
The party opposite, they want to get rid of maternity pay, but keep hereditary peers. It's the same old Tories.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics show that turns debate temperature from raging inferno to balmy beer garden. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Alex Andreou, the excitable yin to Naomi's evidence-based yang, fresh from yet more midnight musings.
We promise to take our own path on the stories that you tell us matter to you, and in the tone and detail we think they deserve.
So it's time to stop rage posting, step away from the keyboard, make a cuppa, and let us embark on another quiet riot.
Welcome to another episode of Quiet Riot with me, Naomi, whose suntan is fading fast as we gallop furiously towards an autumn of clock changes, presidential elections, and UK budgets.
And I'm Alex. My suntan faded long ago, but I keep a little Greek sunshine in my pocket for all occasions.
And I'm the producer, Kenny Campbell, keeping this little show on the road. Remember, if you're a supporter of the show on Ko-Fi, you can also join our Discord channel where Quiet Rioters get to know each other better, chat about politics, kittens and knitting, make new friends and meet a much better class of enemy.
Just before we started recording, the assisted dying bill was introduced into Parliament. For those of you who haven't caught the episode that I recorded with Andrew Copson at the weekend, we discussed the issue, I think, quite sensitively and calmly and soberly. And I'd encourage you all to go and have a listen if you haven't already.
And you might also want to check out my latest midnight upload, the down low on the ludicrous topic of Swiftgate. I did it so we don't even have to mention it today, as it is likely to trigger a reaction from me that is more riot than quiet.
So on today's show, it is the economy stupid. We're going to bring you the latest figures, look at budget speculation and work out whether there is room for Labour to turn around the proverbial tanker.
Plus, special guest Tristan Kirk, court correspondent for the Evening Standard, joins us to rake over the criminal justice car crash that is the single justice procedure. Welcome to QRHQ, Tristan.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tristan, you received this year's Paul Foot Award for Campaigning and Investigative Journalism, presented by none other than Private Eye editor Ian Hislop. Who was up against you, and have they been interviewed by the Met in connection to his cab being attacked?
Well, there was some great stories up for the Paul Foot Award, there really was, and I was quite surprised that they went for me. There was some great journalism looking into the way that mental health services are delivered or not delivered, as the case may be, and particularly involving children. So I'd encourage anybody listening to this to have a look at those.
But you just won another award today. Is the surprise beginning to fade?
No, it isn't.
There's still imposter syndrome.
I'm incredibly grateful to the Evening Standard for supporting me and to put me forward for these awards and that they're given to me. But to be perfectly honest with you, I usually sit in the corner of the court trying to be as anonymous as possible and certainly not speaking in front of large groups of people. So this is a very uncomfortable position to be in.
Pretty much like a defendant.
A host of numbers have been published this week alongside various pre-budget gossip and speculation. UK inflation fell to 1.7% this year in the years to September and marks the first time inflation has fallen below the Bank of England's 2% target for 3 years. The 1.7% figure is the lowest since April 2021, when it came in at 1.5%. Now, ordinarily, this would lead us to hope that interest rates might fall, but the budget is still a fortnight away, and rumours are swirling that Reeves will loosen the fiscal rules to increase capital spending. So it's not quite as obvious that the Bank of England will indeed slash the base rate. And indeed, sub 4% mortgage rates are already beginning to vanish. Lenders repricing home loan deals upwards. NatWest is the latest bank to announce it's going to be putting mortgage rates up. And that's following fresh in the wake of Santander and TSB, who announced similar changes on Monday. So as of Thursday, NatWest is increasing its lowest 5-year fix up to 4.09%. And then, of course, there is this...
We hope you enjoyed the mortgage update with Naomi Smith.
But setting aside the 22 billion black hole that the Treasury identified when they took the reins back in July, another 20 billion was always going to be required to prevent real-term cuts to public spending. And Labour has signalled that their government would end austerity. So the question mark does remain as to how they're going to plug that gap. So while the inflation news seems to be good, other indicators much less rosy. But the week began, Alex, with an investment summit.
It did.
In the Guildhall in the city. A summit of investors did bring some pretty positive sounding news. Any of it stand out for you?
Yeah. I mean, look, Labour's ambition is not an easily achievable one. Conservatives
fastest growth in the G7? Well, no, it's bloody not.
Not just the growth target, actually, but the general ambition to be pro-worker, pro-business and pro-public services. Those are three things that need work to balance, right? And I think the incident of DP World, the owners of P&O, promising 1 billion, then withdrawing 1 billion, then finally committing to 1 billion at the summit, although it wasn't a huge amount, it's a significant amount, but not huge, but I think it kind of summarizes exactly that difficult balance between saying we want everybody to be happy. In many ways, a Conservative government has an easier job always in this field because they're like, fuck the workers. We're going to slash your rights.
When it came to Johnson, it was fuck business and all.
Fuck business and all, yeah. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said something which I thought was quite interesting. He accepted that supply-side reforms are unusual from a centre-left government. And there has been a flurry of announcements that kind of stamps the government's seriousness on this, the industrial strategy, National Wealth Fund, British Business Bank. All will depend on delivery, I think. Larry Fink, who runs a massive investment management company called BlackRock, put it best, I think, after the summit. He said, and I paraphrase, when business smells a problem, it runs away. When it smells an opportunity, the money just runs towards it. So on the face of it, 60 billion worth of investment announced at the summit is a huge victory for Labour. It really is a significant amount of money, and it is running towards them. They're at that stage now. Mm-hmm. But if business begins to smell that there is a problem with delivery, that there is a dysfunction in the administrative side of things, they can start to turn away.
Particularly the regulatory side of things. Yeah. The other thing that is being talked about quite a bit this week is whether employer national insurance contributions are going to change. They're currently 13.8% of an employee's earnings above 9,100. The Chancellor reported to be considering an increase so that employers would have to pay that 13.8% rate on money paid into worker pension schemes. And it could raise something like 17 billion, according to Treasury figures. However, Resolution Foundation, so the pretty well-respected think tank that dives into a lot of this, says the figure's probably more likely to be about 12 billion because the state is going to have to pick up the tab for the public sector employees' extra
Of
payments.
course, yeah, because they're the employer in
Indeed.
that case.
So if it was introduced, it would cost an employer an extra £119 per employee for an employee on the median salary, which is about 35,000.
Naomi's an accountant, Tristan.
If you can't tell,
No,
I
she
love
is.
me
She
numbers.
actually is an accountant.
And again, this is, I think, back to that thorny issue you talked about with whose side are you on, who are you really helping out here, etc. Any particular views on?
I mean, I really dislike this notion that you would never get a CEO taking over a massive conglomerate saying, my aim is to piss off my staff or, piss off my shareholders, or that is the balance.
I think Elon Musk may have. It may be the exception that proves the rule.
And is paying for it. But the point is, I don't think this is a zero-sum game. I think it's a narrow path, but there is a path to some balance there. Now, I think there's been quite a lot of convoluted analysis about how an increase of employers' national insurance is really going to be paid by working people because everything is eventually passed to the workers, including by voices I respect like Paul Johnson from the IFS, Dan Needle, the tax accountant. I would love to talk to both of them about their thinking on this, and I'll try to organize an interview. But, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, in the very grand scheme of things, they are right in that money the government takes out of the economy is money taken out of the economy. It depends what you do with it, right? If you put it back in the economy in a productive way, it can be a good thing. So I don't think it necessarily leads to that money being extracted regressively from poor people. Like profit not reinvested, but paid in dividends, which are scarcely taxed, and then squirreled away to tax havens, that is money taken out of the economy. And there's trillions of it sitting in the Cayman Islands. But I digress. Prima facie, it seems to me convoluted to say changing a rate for an employer is a tax on working people and therefore a breach of the Labour manifesto. You could apply the same logic to corporation tax. That'll be an extra cost to business that they might pass to the consumer or the employee or whatever. It still doesn't make it a tax on working people's income. But I do agree with both Johnson and Needle that there are better areas to tax. I think there are better areas for reform. Capital gains tax is just a
I'm going to come to capital gains tax in a second.
Exit tax is another one that really caught my eye that Dan has been campaigning for, because there is a weird imbalance in the system at the moment that means if you basically start a company somewhere else and grow it somewhere else and then move to the UK and 6 months later you sell it, you pay tax on the entire value that was actually created somewhere else. If you create a company in the UK, grow it in the UK, and then move to Luxembourg, and in 6 months' time you sell it, you pay basically bugger all. And so what he suggested is that the tax should follow where the value was created, essentially, to avoid this kind of corporate gaming. That seems to me a really good idea.
On the employer stuff, there were other figures out around unemployment this week. Unemployment has fallen again. It was already pretty low. It's fallen to 4%.
It nudged slightly up in the summer, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
Now it's fallen again.
And the number of those who are economically inactive, though, is 21.8%. And that is still much higher than pre-pandemic levels. And so I suppose when you're looking at the figures and trying to game out the impact of a tax change, you've got to look at whether that may cause some employers to say, well, we'll react by reducing headcount. And that won't be something that would be at all welcomed by this government scrabbling for some good news stories. You were right to mention capital gains tax. It does seem likely that there could be a rise from a maximum of 24% for second homes and 20% for shares to somewhere in the region of 33 to 40%. Some has rebuffed suggestions that it would be raised as high as 39% as, quote, wide of the mark at that investment conference on Monday.
36 then. I reckon 38 or 37 he couldn't get away with wide of the mark.
But 36
just
around about. Apparently only 350,000 people are liable for paying capital gains tax at the moment, but yet people often say it will lead to capital flight and all the millionaires and billionaires will leave. How likely do we think it is that a rising CGT would generate the kind of capital flight that the market fundamentalists would have us believe?
Look, the Laffer curve is something that was drawn on the back of a napkin, quite literally. And there is very little evidence of it happening. Of course, there is a point, a price sensitivity point, where you make yourself unattractive as a location for whatever. But whether that point is at 20% or 21%, because any increase seems to be met with this notion that everyone will take their billions and go.
Yeah.
Also, that's been posited in response to changing the non-dom arrangement. And it's like, this is literally a regime that allows you to pretend you've already left. So who gives a flying fuck if you actually leave?
Well, I would argue that you should tax things that you can't take out of the country quite so easily as moving your business to Luxembourg or investing in the Cayman Islands, and that is in the form of a land tax. I would like, if listeners would enjoy it, to do a deep dive on the Georgia's land value taxation
Sorry, the
argument.
moment you said things you can't take out of the country very easily, I was thinking
You can't move
your
land.
music equipment for the cheese for sale to Europe.
Sausages.
Tristan, do you want to stay in your lane? Are you feeling brave enough to dip your toe into this? Well, I don't know what your background is actually. Have you always been a justice-focused person?
I know, not always. I was a local journalist before that. And then I was, in my university days, a politics student.
Right.
To be honest with you, when we talk about economics and budgets, I'm obviously interested as a person.
Yeah.
Not a business owner.
Do you sit near the politics desk at the...
No,
Do you hear
not
gossip?
at all. They're based in Parliament.
Oh, right.
Their own little
Lobby
annex.
corridor.
What I think when I hear certainly at the moment, budgets with my professional head on, it's very depressing because in my professional area in the courts, there is this crying need for millions and millions, if not billions, of investment in a sector. And what we're really going to get out of this budget and probably the next 2 or 3 is a cut.
Yeah.
There might be some crumbs thrown to the table for justice, but it's a sector that continually gets ignored and cut back and cut back. And so when you're talking about changes to capital gains or national insurance, all I really hope is it generates enormous amounts of money for the government to start throwing at areas of our society that actually need it. I just can't see it happening anytime soon.
Starmer is from that area, right? No one could hope to understand the problems at the moment with the justice system, with actually the fabric of the buildings of the courts that's falling down. The probation service is on its knees, the prison service. So is there any part of you that hopes that understanding and that closeness and obvious affection for the area might result in something slightly more optimistic than you predict at the moment?
There is a hope. I think a lot of people in the legal profession and that area hope that Starmer and other people who are lawyers in government focus on it more than the last government fancied it.
Yeah.
But it's like saying that the new Prime Minister is in the area of construction and he's going to look at a smouldering pile of rubble and instantly fix it. The court system has been effectively obliterated by years, if not decades, of it being minimised and cut back in a way that the health service, as much as the health service has its problems, and we all recognise that, never has been. The health service is sort of ring-fenced and looked after as best as it can be. Whereas justice, which I think is of equal importance to society, has always been like the first stopping point for cutbacks.
And let's talk a bit about what that actually might look like. I know a judge who said that there used to be these very highly trained interpreters that would be part of the court that would help somebody who maybe had special needs, who was giving witness testimony, to help them to understand the questions that were being asked of them. But they're highly specialised and incredibly expensive. And so the CPS were not hiring them. Judges were then saying, well, I don't want to hear this unless we have a fair trial with the right people in place. And it would mean then that some really awful cases were being settled on lesser charges and not going to court and things like that. For listeners that may not understand what it means that the justice system has had such austerity, how that manifests in terms of trial.
I honestly, I could talk for hours about the things that have deteriorated. They sold off the buildings, which is just such a fundamentally silly thing to do in the years sort of 2010 through to 2019. They sold off some courts that were, necessarily needed to be sold off, but they sold off perfectly good ones as well. You talk about translators. It's a running saw within the justice system that you've got a central contract for translators and they don't turn up. They are of insufficient quality. I covered a really serious sentencing hearing the other day where there was no translator, and there was a choice between, adjourning it off or getting somebody on a video link to sort of shout across the courtroom at the defendant. It sounds ridiculous because that's what it is. Yesterday, I was sat in court as we waited for an hour and a half, 2 hours for the defendant to be brought from the prison to the court. Didn't get there for 10:30. I think got there somewhere like 12:30. It's an enormous waste of money. It's a fundamental thing that you have to do is get the defendant into the courthouse. And why doesn't that happen properly is because you have got a system that has just been starved of resources to the point where they can't even get prisoners into a van and to arrive in court on time. As I say, I could go on and on, but that's the sort of the what you see every day. Yeah. None of this is new. Anybody who's been in court will tell you.
You could replicate this in social care.
Yep.
You could have the same conversation about schools. The bottom line is that there are certain areas that have been protected from austerity at the expense of other areas which have been really starved for a very long time. One last thing I wanted to talk about. Tristan, you were educated at a fee-paying school on a scholarship.
I was?
Yeah. The first, it seems, of your many, many awards. Do you have any strong views on the VAT exemption being basically withdrawn from fee-paying schools?
I wouldn't say I've got strong views. When that was first mooted as a policy, I personally thought it was a good idea. The objections that were put forward appeared to amount to the burden of the VAT being taken away from private schools. Fee-paying schools will be passed on to the parents, to the pupils.
Some of whom are not mega rich.
No, and my family's not in that category. As I say, I, as a child, was given an option to go around some schools, pick the one I liked. The one I chose turned out to be a fee-paying school, and my parents said, well, we'll have to apply for a scholarship. If you don't get it, it'll have to be a different school. So I'm not in the category of, sort of super rich. But to me, as an adult looking at fee-paying schools and private schools, I've always found it rather puzzling that they had that exemption because of their charitable status, usually. It just seemed like a rather odd state of play.
And now it turns out that it may not be the revenue raiser that was hoped for, because these schools will now be able to register for VAT, having been exempt, and by virtue of being registered for VAT, they can reclaim
other things. So they can back claim the tax they paid on capital projects like buildings, land acquisitions, so big ticket items over the last 10 years. But all businesses do that.
They do. But I think that wasn't necessarily factored into the calculations, and so is yet again another difficult thing heading into this budget.
I mean, for me, it wasn't so much the size of the revenue raised as the principle.
Oh, totally. And I
it just
wholeheartedly
back
it.
And actually, it seems to me, as a foreigner, that certainly the top fee-paying schools are not the most positive influence on British society and British politics. They seem to churn out people with all the right tools to succeed, but none of the right fundamentals, it seems to me. I may be being terribly unfair, but we have seen a succession of people that have treated this country as a subject of private bets and private competitions from their old school days, rather than a nation with people who need governance.
Well, that might be a commentary on one or two private schools. If I
Well,
can stand up for my own one,
for sure.
It was a very good school. We haven't churned out any prime ministers, but we did benefit from, a lot of investment in the school. I personally had a great education, but I looked at my brother went to a state school.
And he's not an award-winning journalist.
No, but he is a very successful person and came out of a state school, but without the level of investment that my school benefited from. And so I think there's often a sort of a linear view of private schools turnout, the kind of political leaders we've been used to.
I think we talk a lot on this show about the comms handling. On this case, I think it's both a bit of comms and policy. I would have phased it in, and I don't really know why they didn't say that over 5 years we will phase out the exemption or, increase your contribution on the VAT front. And I think that would have given parents with children currently in the system a bit of time to adjust, or maybe even have left it by the time it would have fully kicked in. Very last thing I'd like to talk about then is with the inflation news, which is good news. How bad a decision to call the election in July for Rishi Sunak is it now looking? Do we think if he'd gone in November following news like this, he may have stemmed the losses?
No, I don't think the election result had anything to do with the economy. The inflation rate, a few points this way or that. I think the news matrix would have been different if Sunak was still in. All we would be hearing every day is about the record numbers of people crossing the channel. And he may have got actually more badly beaten.
Well, call to action this week is a plug for Best for Britain's current intern, Josh, who has written a piece about Scandinavian countries improving educational and economic output since they completely banned private schools. So we'll leave a link to that in the show notes.
And I will also put up a link to a consultation about fee-paying schools that is currently going on. If you have strong views, that is a place to put them.
Quiet, riot. Woke is the simple past of the verb to wake. The opposite would be slept or fell asleep. Last week, we brought you the thrilling news that Russia is offering the asleep, as we shall now call them, refuge from wokery in return for a commitment to serve in Russian armed forces. And I don't expect Alex to be able to top that one, but nonetheless, he is back with another extraordinary story for us in this week's Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
Alex, hit me.
Okay, I can't and I don't think I will ever be able to match that one in terms of scope. But in terms of joy and laughter that this story has given me, I think I can do quite well. So today's Wokey Dokey comes courtesy of The Sun. Shoppers, Naomi, have been left. Can you guess the present participle follows? It is a very, very favourite of Wokey Dokey.
No, go for it.
Fuming.
Oh.
They were left fuming, Naomi, after spotting a major change to Quality Street chocolate tubs ahead of Christmas. Nestle, the maker of the beloved festive staple, tells us The Sun, said it would be launching entirely paper tubs. So they'll be eliminating the plastic lid. But customers apparently were not too impressed with the eco-conscious container, with one going as far as to say that their Christmas had been ruined.
Christmas was ruined when they stopped making metal tins for it. What are you going to keep your needles in now?
He's the one, isn't he? He's the one online through some anonymous account going, my Christmas is ruined. Okay, so commenting on a social media post showing the new box, one shopper said, just when we thought we couldn't sink any lower as a nation. Well, another said the decision has taken the sparkle and excitement out of Christmas. Hate it. No joy left. Another
None.
said.
Yeah.
The Sun tells us Nestle fans were equally heartbroken when Quality Street changed the wrappers in October 2022. The iconic brightly coloured plastic and foil wrappers were replaced with a more understated form of waxed paper. Mm-hmm. Shoppers are still recovering from the decision. This is an actual quote. So Nestle said it's rolling out the paper tins as part of a trial. Mm-hmm. They're only in 6 supermarkets up and down the country. Never recycled aught in my life. Straighten the bin every time, a disgruntled one said. But not all shoppers were upset by the move, the Sun adds. Great idea, said one customer.
Called Kenny Campbell.
So is the Sun now boycotting Quality Street?
I have no idea.
Street.
I mean, of all the things, like look around the world, look at the devastation of climate change, 2 wars, look at the economy, look at justice.
Such a drama queen.
The baby Jesus will be turning in his little...
Look, from a PR perspective,
Christmas is ruined because a tub no longer has a plastic lid. Grow the fuck up.
It's one of the great Christmas traditions of the 21st century.
Is it?
The Christmas tradition of Quality Street or Celebrations or another chocolate company messing with something for 60 stores only so they can guarantee their first Sun page lead of the festive season. I'm all in favour.
Do you know what? I can't believe that we're talking about a Christmas story in the middle of October.
Not even Halloween, yeah?
I'm absolutely fuming.
So true.
A bit late.
We haven't even had Halloween on Fire Night.
Very good, Tristan.
This is ridiculous.
Now we're going to dive into the murky world of magistrates, courts, but stick with us because if you or someone you know has ever fallen foul of rail ticketing rules, TV licensing laws, or even owed the DVLA a bit of money, this could apply to you. The single justice procedure was set up in 2015 and is a secretive court process in England and Wales which empowers magistrates to hand down convictions for minor crimes beyond closed doors, away from the scrutiny that normally comes with open court proceedings. It deals with an enormous volume of cases, about 40,000 minor criminal cases a month, according to the Magistrates Association, adding up to literally millions, many of which result in questionable outcomes. There are clearly serious problems with the system. Tristan, first of all, can you explain why the SJP was set up and how it was meant to work?
I can. It was introduced in 2015 when Chris Grayling was the Justice Secretary.
Oh, favourite of the show.
I'm sure you're familiar with him. It was introduced as a cost-cutting measure primarily to
see above section.
To be able to get through minor criminal cases quicker, more efficiently, and significantly cheaper than having hearings in open court. So how it works is a magistrate sits in private on their own rather than with 2 or 3 colleagues and goes through on the computer each criminal case on paper, written material rather than hearing any evidence in court or hearing from any lawyers, and then they come to a decision. The hearings happen behind closed doors, and so I, as a journalist or any member of the public, isn't now entitled to go and watch them. So we have to make assumptions about what it is that they do. They sometimes get through 200 or 300 cases a day, and there is evidence.
A day?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, what I receive as a journalist is the records of how many cases magistrates get through, and sometimes they are sitting for an hour, say, and dealing with 60 or 70 cases during that hour.
So more than 1 a minute.
I think the shortest ones that I've clocked, if you were to do the maths, is an average of around about 45 seconds per case. Now, We're talking about minor criminal cases. We're potentially talking about a magistrate looking at 60 rail fare evasion cases. Take that as an example. So they are formulaic. There is potentially not that much information to look at. But 45 seconds to decide if somebody is guilty or not, and then to decide the appropriate penalty and to decide whether to apply costs to the case. I don't think that's enough time to do anything.
That's 45 seconds, to be clear, that could land somebody who's made a mistake with a criminal record, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the thrust of my reporting for the Evening Standard over the certainly the last year, but the last few years, is that you've got a system set up so that things happen incredibly quickly, and we've got an enormous bank of evidence now that mistakes are being made. People are being wrongly prosecuted, people are being wrongly convicted, not enough consideration is being given to what it is that is put before the court. There's no involvement of the prosecutor in this process. The magistrate is on their own. There's no prosecutor there to take decisions, as I can explain, that they maybe should. And so you've got the creation of a court system that was designed to be efficient, but is clearly now too efficient. It's going too quickly, too like a conveyor belt.
And what do magistrates themselves say? Like, if I imagine, different sector, health is the obvious one, GPs saying, I don't have enough time now to properly assess a patient because I'm limited to the however many minutes I can get with them before I have to see the next person. Are magistrates themselves saying, I'm not able to do my job properly, or do they like it? I mean,
well, for a long period of time, magistrates themselves aren't technically allowed to talk to people like me, and it'd be against their code. But you get the lines through a body like the Magistrates Association, which represents magistrates. And for a long time, they would say, it's all fine. We'd like there to be more transparency. We'd like the press to be able to see a bit more of it. But they said essentially it's good. In March this year, the Magistrates Association did a survey of all of its members and significantly changed their tack and said, essentially, they were told it's broken, it's not working properly. Magistrates were saying they're rushed into decisions, they've not been trained properly, they don't know that they have some of the powers that they do. They want fundamental reform, which is an amazing thing for magistrates to do, to basically say we've been told to sit in a particular system and we think it's knackered.
Tristan, I have a lot of questions. I used to be from a legal background, but this is very new to me. Is there any kind of quality control? So is there a body like exam results or, all of these things that are done en masse that will pick 10 cases out of those 3,000 and check whether the decisions and the penalties make sense?
An interesting question that I can't properly answer because, once again, we're not allowed to go and watch. So the usual,
so you don't even know.
The usual court process is done in public, and they have that sort of fallback thing that you can say is, well, we did it in open court, even if there's not a journalist there. It was open and it was transparent. So the single justice procedure isn't like that. What the magistrate does have is access to a legal advisor who's a trained person in the law, and they are there to advise them on the cases. However, how much involvement the legal advisor has in the decisions of a magistrate, and a magistrate, let's not forget, is a volunteer, so they're not legally trained. I've got a lot of faith in the magistracy. They are there for good purposes, but they're not legally trained, and so if something slightly complex comes up, they might not spot it. I found some paperwork within the Ministry of Justice which set out how much oversight there was in this kind of process. And in some cases, the magistrate might deal with 100 cases, and 50% of them will be looked at by the legal advisor, which is not a bad check if you think about it. They're not necessarily going over every one, but that's a good sample. In some sessions, they might go through 100 cases and 3% of them are looked at, which is not a good system.
So there's a lack of consistency.
And beyond the legal advisor, that's it. The Ministry of Justice won't monitor what's going on. The government generally won't monitor what's going on. Journalists are significantly
curtailed,
restricted on what kind of scrutiny we can give. Judges won't step in and do it. So this is people's, sort of their lives, big decisions.
Give us the egregious examples that are at the front of your mind.
Sadly, there are too many to go through them all. Yesterday, I reported on the case of a pensioner, nearly 80 years old. He's got macular degeneration and cataracts. He has failing mental health after his wife died from cancer. While all that was going on, his car tax wasn't paid. He owed the DVLA £20. And then he was prosecuted over that £20 and given a criminal conviction. Now, his son wrote in to say, in a nutshell, my dad isn't coping and this bill didn't get paid. And he's very sorry about that. In a normal court proceedings, in open court, the prosecutor from the DVLA would be there and they would see that letter, hear that, and they may well say, that's a terrible situation, we'll withdraw the case, and then let's settle this out of court. In the single justice procedure, it's fast track, there's no prosecutor involvement, it went to conviction, and that poor gentleman has a conviction on his record. Today's case...
Not to mention the stress that it will have put on him to go through that.
Every single one that I talk about is somebody in a vulnerable position, in a difficult period of their life, if not the worst period of their life because of their personal circumstances. And then they have a criminal conviction heaped on top of them. And I think there's a lack of understanding within the legal system as to how devastating that can actually be, especially to somebody with mental health difficulties or learning difficulties. That could be world-ending to them. It's not just a case of a tick box or something rudimentary. Today's case involves a gentleman who hadn't driven his van for some time and the insurance lapsed and he didn't notice, because he's just been diagnosed with end-of-life period of a chronic respiratory disease. Essentially, he's a dying man. And he has gone through this process and ended up with a criminal conviction that just simply could have been avoided. I'm sure that the DVLA didn't want to do that when they started the prosecution. They didn't necessarily know about it, but they didn't find out about it.
So is there an option for mitigating circumstances to be put in front of magistrates under the SJP?
Well, the magistrates see the mitigating circumstances. I should be absolutely clear about that. If they look at it, so they have access to it in the minute that they look at the case, if they look at the mitigating circumstances, then they can take that into consideration. They have the power to send a case back to the prosecutor, but this is a fast-track process, and this is kind of embedded within the process that this will be done really quickly, get things out of the way. And clearly, the cases that I'm bringing up haven't been sent back to the prosecutor to basically just check, is this in the public interest? Are you sure you want to prosecute this person?
And there must be a huge number of cases also when someone is in that situation and not coping because of all this stuff going on. Well, presumably they don't even know they're being taken to court.
I've seen cases. The ones I look at primarily are DVLA cases, so car insurance, car tax, and not paying the TV license. So what you're talking about not paying a bill. And I've come across people who are dying from cancer, who are in a care home getting 24-hour care, so presumably not in a position to know what's going on. I've found people with dementia who are at the latter stages of their lives, people with severe learning difficulties. So these are exactly those kind of people who don't necessarily understand what's going on in the first place. Clearly examples of people who should not be criminally convicted.
And can they appeal?
Yes, they can appeal, but if we take a step back and say, is somebody with severe learning difficulties going to be able to appeal? They were sent a letter. I mean, I've seen cases where they tick the box saying guilty and then right underneath, I didn't do this offence, essentially, and they're still convicted at the end of it. There's significant question marks there. One particular case where it was actually overturned when we reported on it was of a woman with severe learning difficulties who was convicted of not paying her TV licence when all of her finances and the TV licence were managed by the local council. And the local council wrote in and said, yes, this didn't happen. We're very sorry. We didn't pay the bill. Guilty. And that poor woman then received a criminal conviction because somebody in a council office had failed to pay her TV licence. That's the kind of ridiculous cases that are coming out of this system. And I mean, we're all sat here. I can see on your faces that you understand how ridiculous this all is. But I've been reporting on these cases now intensively for 14 months, and no political action has actually been taken.
Tristan, can I widen the lens a tiny bit and ask this? Do you think that the sub-postmaster's Horizon scandal will do anything to shift that? Because it seems to me that at the root of it is an assumption of a purity of motive on the part of the organization bringing the prosecution, and also that automated systems are somehow infallible, which was brought in with the PACE Act, and many people are now saying also needs to be reviewed. So is a big scandal like sub-postmasters, does it attack the root of that?
I think we are seeing a fundamental shift at the moment. When I started doing this kind of reporting that we're talking about, it was sort of August last year. Putting it frankly, until about December, nobody cared. I was running these stories. The public were reacting and saying that's horrific, but nobody in positions of authority seemed to be taking it on board. The Post Office Horizon scandal, which has been rumbling on for years, but didn't really take off
until ITV,
until the drama, and all of a sudden, my reporting on the single justice procedure was suddenly very much more prominent. I think on the back of that, and huge credit to the reporters who worked on that and the people who were overturning the convictions. But what the Post Office exposed was the idea that just because somebody has been convicted, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything was done in the right way. And automated systems, IT, being relied on as the backstop for everything. It's the golden ticket. It wasn't anymore.
Yeah.
And since then, some of the things that have happened is you may well have read about the 75,000 rail fare evasion convictions that are being overturned. There were some tremendously hardy rail users and enthusiasts who'd been posting about it for a long time, and it started to get some traction that they might have a point here, that this single justice procedure has been misused for years. I ran a story on that, and then suddenly it was in front of the chief magistrate, who was taking it incredibly seriously, which he didn't have to do. You know of many examples of organisations and institutions who would say, "Oh, that was wrong," and then that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the end of the story anymore. That there's significant shifts, and just the other day, actually, again, it's rail fare evasion, but Northern Rail were found out to be prosecuting people for the anytime tickets and the rail cards, where there was just like a small amount above, and there was basically a technical infraction, and loads of people have been prosecuted. Again, single justice procedure and those kind of prosecutions. And Northern Rail, I think to the surprise of a lot of people, suddenly pulled the plug on everything and recognised that this is no longer the kind of thing that you can sweep under the carpet.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we haven't had government intervention, we haven't had policy shifts yet, but we're starting to get more people taking these things seriously and saying, it's not just a case that we can rock back and say AI and technology is all great.
On that topic, on the government, Liz Kendall, the Working Pensions Secretary, has just announced an overhaul about how carers' allowances that were overpaid are going to be chased, because there has been some terrible stories about people being chased because they got too much money, and oftentimes not very much too much money, and threatened.
And they didn't know either.
And they didn't know.
A sort of ex post facto adjustment, and suddenly, they've got authorities chasing them for thousands of pounds.
People who are A, under pressure, B, doing the right thing by looking after loved ones who have lost capacity, and C, genuine mistakes. It's what we as reasonable people would class as genuine mistakes. And the fact that somebody like Liz Kendall has now announced an overhaul of how those overpayments are recovered suggests that at a government level, at a ministerial level, somebody is waving a flag and saying, look, this is a big issue and we probably do have to look at it in the round.
I think you can end up sounding terrifically old-fashioned, which I don't consider myself to be, when you say that relying so relentlessly on technology and not having a person looking at these things is not necessarily the way forward. Once upon a time, when somebody didn't pay a bill, then it would go to somebody sat in an office and they would assess it and they would look at everything and take a reasonable decision. Well, we've had, I think, an over-relentless focus on automation, on making things happen as swiftly as possible, with the sort of the central idea that everybody wants everything to happen really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Now, maybe they do, but they also want things to happen properly and fairly as well. And so when you're talking about, not paying for the TV license, for example, and in the single justice procedure cases, it comes back and there's a letter from somebody saying, I didn't pay the TV license because I was in hospital for 6 months. It beggars belief that doesn't actually go in front of a prosecuting lawyer or any official at the TV licensing authority. But that's how we are sort of trained to think now. Doesn't have to. Doesn't have to. Can't possibly need to go in front of them because everybody wants it to go straight to the magistrate. All right, well, that's clearly wrong. But it's this sort of idea that the fast is
the
best.
Industrialization of justice is what.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we're talking before about the economy. Yeah. And everything being squeezed. This is a consequence of everything.
And this is what I want to talk about, because you're dead right. People want things to be fair and correct and done properly. And I think we have quite a strong sense of fairness and justice in British culture. And a few months ago on the show, we talked about happiness. We had a happiness professor on. And one of the points I was making was that we are deeply unhappy because of the small things as much as we are the big things.
That's why I was trying to interrupt you. I wanted to ask the same thing.
And it is the little things that can tip you over the edge. And we now live in such a difficult to navigate society where you can be caught out so easily. You roll your tyre forwards over one line as the light changes and boom, you're going to get done on the camera and slapped with a big fine. And if you don't pay that, then potentially caught, etc. And why I get exercised about that is not just because of the impact it has on us as individuals, but what that then means for public discourse more broadly, and the sense around the country of depression and difficulty and feeling out of control. And I'm coming, of course, to talking about Brexit and that amazing slogan, take back control, worked so well because people felt so out of control. Yeah. I do think for listeners, this in and of itself as a standalone issue is incredibly important, and one that it is definitely right that gets even more coverage than the brilliant work that Tristan does. But to think about what the further implications are, as you say, Alex, on the populist right seizing some of this and using it to blame the wrong people.
Like I said, I had the same note because I genuinely couldn't agree more. There is a sense in which, especially when you are effectively a defendant in a criminal process, you should be the main character of that story. You shouldn't be an extra in that story. And all of this sounds as if you are an extra in that story, as if the process itself is the star of the show and you're just collateral damage. And I am quite speechless about the examples we've heard about, and I'm sure they're only the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like we are deliberately degrading our humanity levels as a country.
Do you know there was a press release that went out last year from the Ministry of Justice celebrating the numbers of cases that had gone through the single justice procedure over a particular period? 1 million cases have been dealt with, and it went, sort of court time saved, efficiency, freeing up, and believe it or not, freeing up more time for the courts and helping with the effort to stop the boats. The single justice procedure was helping the government stopping illegal immigration into the country. That was the argument that was put forward. I thought it was such a staggering press release to put out there. Not only have you drawn a ridiculous line between your court process, which has got nothing to do with immigration courts, but you are basically saying that we have cheapened justice, and we're admitting it right there, so we can focus more attention on our favourite other policy.
What's your call to action, Tristan? We want to offer this one to you.
Well, despite everything I've said, I'm not the kind of person who thinks to tear down the system is the right way forward. There is a place in this world for efficient justice for minor offences, but it must be done properly and it must be done fairly. The Magistrates Association has put forward a 12-point plan of reform. It's full of good ideas. The government could adopt it tomorrow. I have a petition running to draw attention to this area. People can sign it. I don't know if it'll do anything, but they can if they want. I encourage people to write to their MPs and say, this bothers me, because every MP in the country will have constituents who are drawn into this system. Everybody in this room could find themselves, we don't consider ourselves
especially
criminals.
where I drive.
We don't consider ourselves criminals, but if you speed, if you don't pay for the right train fare, if you don't keep up with your bills, you could end up in the single justice procedure. So everyone's got a stake in it working properly and fairly. And I must say that the vast majority of the people who are put into the single justice procedure probably did it. We must acknowledge that.
Sure.
If somebody is caught on a camera speeding, they were probably speeding. But they also deserve a fair, balanced and proper consideration of what the penalty should be, not just an automated speed to the finale. And I also wanted to mention, whilst I'm at it, there's a couple of organisations, one called Appeal and another one called Transform Justice, who have been fantastic campaigners on the single justice procedure, and people should look them up because they do
We're going to drop links to all of those in the show notes, and you have another piece coming out in the Standard today, tomorrow as we record, today as you're listening, which won't quite be out by the time we put the podcast out, but I can go in the notes and update them after 9 o'clock. So I would advise listeners, if you are listening very early on your morning run or the gym or whatever, check out the show notes about lunchtime, and there will be a news story on this by Tristan. Quiet, Riot. Now, Naomi, as we come to the end of the show, it is time for you to elevate our spirits a little, and boy, do we need it after that, with some good news. It's time for new listener, and I have to say my own favourite, Grin and Share It.
No.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. Do-de-o-do-lo, 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 I want good news.
What joyous tidings do you bring today?
Well, if you've ever dipped your toe in the seas around the UK, even in the height of summer, you'll probably have proudly updated your social media status immediately with, hey, look at me taking an ice bath kind of photo. So I want everyone to spare a thought for creatures who inadvertently find themselves swimming a little too far north. And I'm no militarist, but the Royal Navy has done a lovely thing. After being blown thousands of miles off course, cold, stunned and beached, 6 exhausted turtles hitched a ride back to their home in the Azores on board a Royal Navy ship. 6, I know, it's very sweet. 6 loggerhead sea turtles who sort of naturally come from much warmer seas south of the British Isles were probably blown off course by a storm. And then they get stunned into lethargy when they get very, very cold in North Atlantic waters.
They sort of
so a bit like a tortoise going into hibernation, the turtles sort of get desperately sleepy. And they would have died after washing up on the beaches of Devon and Cornwall.
Why am I crying?
Except that they were rescued by 2 local...
I am going through the male menopause. You do
The
know that,
menopause.
right? I now cry at practically every single fucking podcast.
So 2 local marine sanctuaries nursed them back to health. And they were carers at Newquay Blue Reef Aquarium and Anglesey Sea Zoo. So props to them. But they didn't know what to do with these tropical mariners, and they couldn't just be released back into the North Atlantic, or the same thing would have happened again. But there were no aquariums that had the resources to transport them intercontinentally. So enter HMS Medway en route to the Caribbean on counter-narcotics patrol. It has and disaster relief for the Azores. And so alongside her regular cargo of food and spare parts and machinery and disaster relief and aid kits was also loaded Jason, Gordon, Perrin, Hale, Holly and Tony, the 6 loggerhead turtles, and they departed Plymouth last week on a mission to replace the sister ship HMS Trent, and they had a little stopover in the Portuguese islands for turtle repatriation.
Oh, and a little warning to all the drug dealers in the Azores. That, remember the Russians were using beluga whales as spies?
Yeah, maybe the turtles are now trained.
6 trained turtles coming after you.
It was all cover for spy turtles.
Well, that is the end of the show. Thank you all very, very much for listening.
Don't forget our Discord channel is building by the day. There are a couple of 100 people in there at the moment.
It's fun, isn't it?
Incredible. It's a place where our glorious Ko-Fi supporters can hang out and quietly shoot the rioty breeze. If you'd like to join it, head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and sign up as a supporter.
And listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on every social media channel that you can find us. The handle is usually...
Stalkers, basically.
But indeed, at Quiet Riot Pod.
So all that remains for me is to thank our terrific guest, Tristan Kirk, for a magnificent QR debut and also for the work you do.
Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
We
Come back
appreciate
on.
you.
Come back on.
And thank you to our listeners for sharing your headspace with us once again. We will be back. Are we doing...
Trains. An absolute trains feast. It's a longie, it's a deep dive, it's a geekathon, and I absolutely bloody loved recording that.
So we'll be back with a deep dive on trains, I suspect, Friday before lunchtime. Then we'll both speak to you during Sunday school. Keep listening. Keep rebelling against the paucity of the news you are served up. Keep sane. Keep quietly rioting.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreu and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita, artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Music scholarship.
Yay. Amazing.
Very good. Boy soprano.
No.
Okay, because they're usually
Violinist.
they're usually the scarce ones.
Is that what I look like? Trumpet.
Very good.
Loud as possible.
Right, shall we?
Are we recording?
Can everybody just check the phones? I think we've still got a phone on somewhere.